Hey guys, this is Mountain Walk, and today we're going to be talking a little bit about Counterburn. That's right, one of the first sort of decks I wanted to revisit again, mostly because there's just so many different options for it, a lot of different things you can do, and there's obviously a bunch of other different decks I did that I'd like to revisit too, and then again, still some more that I'd like to do, but it feels like, very difficult to get to everything, and then still do the deck tech things and then do other stuff. Uh, anyways, so let's talk a little bit about Counterburn, how this has changed, what we're working with now, all that kind of good stuff. All right. So yeah, I updated this. I've been messing around with it for the last few months, thinking about like what should I do? What could I do? What could I do to make this better or different or whatever? What changed after testing it a little bit a while ago, years ago? I don't know. It's hard to decide everything. Everything sort of blurs together when all my YouTube stuff. I'm like, oh, did I do that 3 years ago? Who knows? Who knows? Um, this time we got a couple dorks, a couple creatures. Again, we still want to basically blank removal. I think that's a pretty useful advantage to have to completely blank removal, creature removal specifically. Um, and I think that the creature that I've chosen, of course, Shard Phoenix, does a pretty good job. I mentioned in my previous video, which of course I will link down below, about how that was a possible creature that you can play. Um, and obviously it's very, very good against, well, any sort of dorks strategy that wants to go wide, obviously, so you don't have to um, waste burn spells basically on the creatures. You can just ride Shard Phoenix to victory, and that's basically your only card that really uses the graveyard, so actual graveyard hate isn't particularly good against you, it's basically bad. But Shard Phoenix is pretty sweet, very hard for some decks to deal with outside of like a Tormod's Crypt or something, or maybe a Phyrexian Furnace, that kind of thing. Or I guess a Coffin Purge too, if they're certain decks are playing that. But yeah, Shard Phoenix very, very sweet, very good against things like elves, goblins, zombies. I mean, obviously, again, any go wide creature deck, Shard Phoenix pretty good against it. And of course, swords doesn't work against it because you can just sack it and then get it back and things like that. So, but although you typically don't really want to keep it in against blue decks or control decks, although it isn't bad, against, say, you can kill mainlands as well as decree tokens, that kind of thing. So just sort of depends. But and of course, there's still so many different cards to test out, so many different ideas, which of course I will be going over. But let's take a look at the deck list. Okay, and so more or less, not much has changed. Again, still the same mana base. I think that worked out pretty well, pretty well. Bunch of islands, mountains, Shivan Reef, and of course the Falling Glaciers engine, uh, which, again, this is, I think, the same mana base I had in the previous deck. Thawing Glaciers, very sweet, very powerful card. I mean, obviously it's extremely glacially slow, but it does exactly what you want. It's kind of like a card advantage engine, get you more mana. Again, this deck can be pretty mana hungry with some of its spells. And even late game, of course, these things pitch to Forbid, which came up quite a few times. Uh, because especially like if you're just going super, super late, you're just more likely to draw the Thawing Glaciers plus Forbid. And like if you have no need to do the Thawing Glaciers thing or whatever, you get some free cards to pitch to Forbid, which is quite nice. So that's kind of cool. I've always found that interaction pretty sweet. Again, we still have the four-factor fiction. That's just basically our only draw. Again, we got some Dismiss, so we got another copy of Dismiss, just as a way to, well, draw cards, right? And not really just play a bunch of one-for-ones and lose like late game if our opponent wants to grind us out. Obviously, Dismiss is 4 mana, which is fairly expensive, So again, this isn't exactly the most ideal card, but it is something I kind of have liked um, in the deck, especially since everything is, you're not really losing out like having to hold up 4 mana, because basically everything except the Shard Phoenixes themselves are instants. So there's something. Um, let's see. Yeah, again, counterspell, mana leaks, blah 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 blah. Of course, we have 3 Prof Bolt now instead of just the 1, just as a way to generate more cards. So it's a impulse on a lightning blast, I believe. So yeah, definitely that's pretty sweet. Again, obviously pretty slow, but for the most part, your curve is not super duper high. Obviously, dismiss, Prof Bolts, and Fofs are expensive, but and the Shard Phoenixes. But you have a bunch of 1 and 2 mana interaction. Well, I guess the only 1 mana interaction is Bolt itself, but a bunch of 2 mana with Fire, Ice, Incinerate, Counterspell, Mana Leak. So yeah. Anyways, so yeah, much more streamlined deck list. Some of the other stuff I took out because like it wasn't bad, but I feel Urza's Rage typically does a better job. I mean, if we really want to hate on creatures or whatever, maybe something like Starstorm might be more appropriate, seeing as how it is also instant speed and can cycle against decks where it's not particularly good. So that's another option too, which I think I mentioned in the previous video. But yeah, lots of different things. Again, pretty sweet, pretty solid stuff. Pretty much just maxed out on all the cards I liked. Urza's Rage, pretty cool, pretty interesting card. Um, and yeah, this is definitely a deck where I think Urza's Rage is actually pretty good. And of course, the sideboard. The sideboard itself, again, you'll want a lot of the same cards I had in there last time. Blue Elemental Blast, Red Elemental Blast, or their Ice Age counterparts, either or. Some number of Bile Gnomes. You probably want some artifact destruction of some sort, Graveyard Hate. Um, maybe you want things like Hibernation. I mean, there's a bunch of different cards you can play. I mean, nothing too weird, just the same stuff you see in every blue and red sort of sideboard, that kind of stuff. There's like I said, it kind of depends on what you're playing, what you expect, that kind of thing. So obviously, even Pyroclasm's a good one, even though obviously it is a sorcery, it's very strong. If you're just looking for more wrath effects, obviously Shard Phoenix is a little slow, but yeah. So there you go. All right. Yeah, like I said, a more streamlined list, which is sweet. Yeah, some of the cards I tested out weren't bad or anything. I mean, again, there's still even more stuff I'd like to play. Like, I'd like to play Arc Lightning. I love Arc Lightning. Of course, being as a sorcery, it's a little, well, it's a little slow. That's kind of a problem. But obviously, it can be card advantage. Obviously, getting it as a 3-for-1 is a great feeling, very great feeling. Big fan of Arc Lightning. Definitely a card I've loved since I was a kid, and definitely one I love playing. But more or less, the three mana slot is occupied by Urza's Rage. This is definitely one of the cards you'll play last, like against when you're facing control decks. Because A, it can't be countered just in general or whatever. And you can burn them, and they can't exactly save their counter spells for the last spells you play. Um, because obviously Urza's Rage itself is uncounterable, so that's pretty sweet. And again, you can kick it too, and like super duper late game situations, which again isn't that unusual when you're playing like control mirrors, things like that. So that's pretty sweet. The whole deck can basically be Drago, play as a Drago deck, minus the 2 Phoenixes, which of course are obviously you only play as sorcery speed, but the Phoenix sacrificing effect, of course, can be played as an instant, so it's still sort of works out that way. So yeah, Phoenix is again very strong. Again, it still does your deck is completely immune to removal thing, creature removal, but you still get a persistent source of damage. You still get to use the graveyard a little bit. You get another board wipe, and yeah, it's very difficult for certain decks to beat this kind of thing. So yeah, And of course, like I said, there's still so many different cards to try out. I'm still not convinced this is the deck's final form. And actually, let's go ahead and look at some of the different options that we can play. Okay, so there's a lot of different things going on here. But first, what we have is Future Sight. Again, a card I had in my first build of this list. Of course, it's very, very sweet. I feel like maxing out, maybe not maxing out on Future Sight. Maybe we only want 2 or 3 Future Sight, plus 4 Impulse and like 3 to 4 Mana Flare or something as a way to really kind of go a more combo control route. So you would obviously have Mana Flare and then play Mana Flare turn 3, turn 4 cast Future Sight, turn 5 like you'll have like 10 mana available, you know, and just play like a ton of spells. Again, obviously the counter magic isn't super ideal if you reveal it off the top, but again, it's still card advantage is still pretty good. Like, you know, you just stop playing spells, hold up your counter magic, and then at the end of turn, right, if you can play all the instants and stuff in your hand with the extra leftover mana, then you draw the counter spell, and then you can continue to go off, basically. So the Mana Flare Future Sight thing would be something to test, and of course the impulse is sort of to bring everything together. Now, of course, you could play Intuition as well. Intuition is obviously a pretty strong card, and if you had 3 copies of Mana Flare and 3 copies of Future Sight, you can Intuition for them fairly easily. Impulse I like just because it's cheaper and it's not so prescriptive, where you can just like, you know, oh, I need to Impulse for a land on turn 2. I only have 2 lands in your opening hand or whatever. So that Impulse is a little bit more flexible, a little bit better in just normal sort of play patterns when you're not going through a sort of a combo line. So this is kind of something interesting I thought about. Again, obviously big issues with you know, naturalized effects, red and blue blast too, which is, you know, might make it a non-starter. But it is something fun and would certainly be interesting to test out. Yeah, I'm definitely a big fan of that. That would be pretty sweet, pretty sweet. Um, I'm not sure how that would work, but I want to test it. I want to test it. Okay, and speaking of tutors and all that kind of good stuff, we have Quiet Speculation. Again, a card typically only seen in Madness. I think there is some interesting stuff here. For example, you know, against, well, obviously, Quiet Spec into basically any number of flashback cards is very good against control decks, whether it just be Lightning Surge, flashing that back for 6 damage that can't be prevented. So, again, good against something like Circle of Protections, that kind of stuff, or flashing back Deep Analysis, you know, to draw a bunch of cards. That's pretty good. And I guess you can even put Firebolt in there if you drew some number of the other copies of these flashback cards. So you still always have things to quiet spec for. But obviously Firebolt is a little bit more versatile. It's still good against dorks and things like that if you just draw it normally like it's just a regular removal spell. But being able to be targeted with Quiet Speculation is obviously very inefficient, right? 5 mana to flash it back for 2 damages, not the best deal. But it is still an option. So these are kind of things I think would be interesting to test out. Definitely things I kind of like. I mean, there's even the, what is it? Fervent Denial, I believe, is the flashback counterspell, although I think it's like 6, 7 mana to counter stuff. Flashback. Obviously, that was, you know, the idea of a counterspell that flashes back is obviously pretty unfun, pretty bad design. So obviously they had to make it extremely expensive. But yeah, there might be other flashback cards I can't think of off the top of my head, like maybe Bash to Bits, which I believe is like the Pillage or something. So, anyways, these ones are interesting. You know, obviously Quiet Spec for triple Lightning Surge is like basically lethal by itself. It's 18 damage if you have Threshold, so that's pretty sweet. And of course, Deep Analysis is just good casting it. 4 mana, 2 cards isn't exciting, but being able to flash it back for another 2 cards is great, especially against control decks where your life total is not under pressure. So again, another option to explore. So pretty interesting stuff. And we're not done. We're not done. Wishes, Cunning Wish in particular, of course, although I guess you could play Burning Wish too, which is certainly an option. Again, that's something I'd have to explore in a different video, but I'm particularly talking about Cunning Wish, being able to fetch out things like Capsize, or even things like Rushing River, Repulse, Chain of Vapor, any sort of bounce spells, pretty strong. Pre-board being able to get like red elemental blast or blue elemental blast can be useful. Maybe a counter spell, a draw spell like an opportunity or something like that. All sorts of different things you can get. Of course, this kind of cannibalizes your sideboard a bit, so it's like, okay, how many cards do I devote to Cunning Wish? How many slots do I devote to actual things? And of course, unfortunately, these are questions that are sort of metagame dependent, but due to the fact that Premodern is kind of a very wide open metagame, I'm trying to always go with things that are just the most generally useful, try to cover as many bases as possible, or at least as many that make sense. So yeah, Cunning Wish, definitely a very interesting card, a very sweet card, very powerful card. Again, another instant, so it just gives you more options and a turn to do all sorts of things. For example, being able to get mana short is pretty good. You can mana short them and then maybe burn them out or something. I believe there's also an instant speed, gosh, I think there's an instant speed fireball with flashback, but I believe it's only, it's from Odyssey block, so it's Odyssey Torment or Judgment, I can't remember. And then like it deals damage to a player. It's like a red X and an instant, and deals damage to a player, but only they can redirect the damage to a creature if they have one. Um, so that's kind of interesting, being able to wish for like a fireball effect against like control decks is kind of interesting, kind of like that. Um, or even if, I guess it kills a creature, sort of. But that's there's all sorts of interesting cards that you can get. So yeah, definitely a lot of really cool stuff that Cunning Wish enables. Um, I mean, just obviously you can play 3 Foffs main deck and then the 4th in the board to fetch for. Um, so yeah, just tons of options, tons of options. So yeah, there you go. There you go. That's pretty much it. That's pretty much it. I mean, like I said, this is still a work in progress. Still a lot more work to be done. Definitely a lot of things I like about it. Still pretty sweet. You get a big sideboard of stuff. Blue and red have really strong sideboards of cards that you can board in. Things like a null, very strong. Red blast, blue blasts. Um, uh, Shoot, bottle gnomes. Bottle gnomes I'm a big fan of just against aggressive decks in general, right? Because even if they try to remove it, it's like basically always, gives you like a bunch of extra life, which is quite good. I just love the art on bottle gnomes anyways. But yeah, so definitely a lot of cool stuff going on. Definitely really sweet deck, really powerful deck. Hopefully gets you thinking about all sorts of cool stuff. So yeah, there you go. Hopefully you're all fired up too, all excited. Use fire and ice stuff, or maybe fire and lightning. Who knows? Anyways, fire, ice, and lightning, right? Um, anyways, guys, thanks for stopping by, and have a great day.